Reading chapters 8 and 9 in The Great Turkey Walk by Kathleen Karr. Chapter 8. Now, as I see it, Mr. Peace was saying, we got a couple things on our side. The three of us and Emmett was huddled under a lean-to of branches and leaves we'd cobbled together against the rain, still falling fast and furious. A little fire sputtered bravely before us, and we was warming our hands by it. Unfortunately, our hands was the only things going to get warm this night. Between the weather and the early darkness, even Jabeth hadn't been able to catch us supper. What might they be, those things on our side? I asked. Jabeth shivered between us, but gave Mr. Peace a hopeful look. First off, my drover says, your pa and that Cleaver person don't expect us to be unbound this quick, nor do they expect us to be pursuing them. They just took it for plumb natural that we'd give up and tire. Mr. Peace held out a second finger. Next, they don't look like the sort to know a blamed thing about turkeys, after the way they treated that fine horse flesh. You think they's likely to destroy my birds? I worried aloud. Miss Rogers, she's counting on me to get them straight through to Denver. All 1,000 of them. And there's bound to be some loss, Simon, Mr. Peace cut in. Even with extraordinary circumstances, we got us some extraordinary circumstances right now. And it's all my fault, I mourned. If I hadn't have wanted to see them lions and tigers and camels the way I did. Don't you go berating yourself, Simon. It was a true educational urge. Ain't ever nothing wrong with one of them. Mr. Peace absently petted Emmett in his lap. But there's always a surprise tucked away somewheres, and your pa turned into a very wild one indeed. Jabez shifted to get his bare feet closer to the flames. Tell us some more about what we got going for us, Mr. Peace, sir. I need to know. Bidwell Peace smiled. What remaining teeth he had flashed real nice. Why, we got you, Jabeth. They don't know about you at all. After Jabeth finished beaming, Mr. Peace wrapped up our planning session. Now, I think we all ought to get us some sleep. Come first light, we catch up with them rustlers. Sneaky light. Don't let them know we's about. We'll do things extemporaneous from there. It wasn't any hardship rising early in the morning. I was stiff all over from the damp and cold and not having near enough sleep on account of the drips of water that hit me regularly through our roof during the night. I missed my blankets and I missed my breakfast. Most of all, I missed the comforting gobbles of my turkeys. Who'd have thought a blood father could take all that away from his only son? Aunt Mabel's railing about Pa over the years came back to me. At least she'd been correct about that one thing. I stretched to rid my mind of the thought and turned to my companions. Hey, Jabeth. My friend seemed able to sleep through anything. I gave him a gentle boot. Mr. Peace, time to turn out and move on. We loped down the center of the muddy road to warm ourselves. For a comfort, at least, the rain had slowed to a misty drizzle. After about a mile, we saw a lone, deserted-looking farmhouse. I saw Jabeth perk up and start paying attention. You see some breakfast lying about, Jabeth? I asked, sort of jocular-like. Didn't really expect an answer, but Jabeth, he broke into a sprint. Then he yelled back, come and get it! Emmett reached him first, then me. By the time Mr. Peace puffed up, Jabeth already had me hanging onto the horns of an old brown cow. Lowing something pitiful, she was. Small wonder, since she badly needed milking. We're going to do us a good deed all around, Jabez said, but first I'll need your hat, Mr. Peace. Mr. Peace clamped onto his old slouch topper fast. My hat? What on earth for? He looked at Jabeth, then studied the cow. Slowly it began to dawn on him. No. Why, no way am I going to... He kept spluttering, hanging on to that hat. This headgear and me, we've gone through hell and beyond together. How'd you expect me to... Jabeth held out his hand, patient and expectant both. Mr. Peace gave up on his hat, slowly. In a few minutes, the old cow was almost sighing with relief, and we were taking turns drinking our fill of warm milk from that very disreputable article. When we couldn't swallow any more, Emmett got his turn. The dog was so appreciative, he licked out every last drop, then picked up the brim between his teeth and trotted the hat back to his master. What'd you expect me to do with this now? Mr. Peace crumpled the soggy felt in his hands. Disgust shone all over his face. Put it back where it belongs, I laughed. We might need it again come dinner time. It wasn't but another mile long that we saw the first signs of my deepest fears. One lone bronze turkey was straggling down the road, looking as lost as ever could be. I whistled, then set in to making him a little turkey small talk. That Trom trots Right up to me, I swear. I never saw such a grateful look in any bird's beady eyes. I fondled his miserable wet feathers, the whole yard from his neck to the tip of his tail. Look sharp, J-Beth, Mr. Peace. Look sharp, J-Beth, Mr. Peace. We may be closing in on the rascals. Come mid-afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds with the kind of milky light that reminded me of breakfast. By this time, Emmett was feeling so much better. So were the rest of us. We'd rounded up near 100 of my birds. They'd been found in dribs and drabs, forlorn in trees, pecking despondently by the side of the road. J-Beth even fetched one from the very mouth of a fox. Got him a nice fox pelt in the bargain, and the turkey's neck not even broken yet, either. I began to feel a little sorry for my pa. If this was the way he intended to make his fortune, he'd find himself in Denver with only about a dozen turkeys for his trouble. Mr. Peace must have been considering the same thing, because he inspected our little flock and grinned. At the rate we're going, boys, all we have to do is stay a few steps behind the rogues. In a day or two, we'll have us all our birds back in hand. But not the wagons and supplies, I reminded him, not to mention Sparky and the rest of my fine mules. J-Beth flipped my bowie knife as graceful as one of Miss Lila's turns on that flying swing. Only thing concerns me is the guns they got. I don't take to guns when they's in somebody else's hands. Me neither, I agreed. Gotta catch 'em when their guns is elsewhere, Mr. Peace reckoned. Maybe while they're asleep? Now that's an idea. I continued down the road. Take left flank, Emmett, but don't hurry him too hard now. We don't want to turn a bend and bump into my paw. We waited till our little flock was rooted comfortably for the night in a small patch of woods, and then set off along the next piece of road. 2 miles before that, we got through the village of Russellville, practically on the tails of Paul and Cleaver. At least that's what the local folks said when they sees us coming. But they said it far from behind curtained windows and doors just barely ajar. You with them turkey people? That was a sort of whisper, and I had to hunt around to find where it came from. It was a small boy peeking out the crack of a door. Not on your life. We're after him for stealing my birds. Ain't you got no guns? Don't believe in guns. A communal sigh issued forth from the houses, and heads started poking out. First, slowly, then with indignation. They was waving them weapons around most dangerous. That slim gambler-looking fellow, he shoots his off, just 'cause my boy helped himself to one of them birds. Lord knows there was enough. I swiveled around right quick to make certain Emmett and J-Beth had our flock strictly in hand. They did. So how many you get from the villains? I asked casual-like. A giggle came from a window further down the street. About a half a dozen, all big uns. After the way they was acting, we figured them birds was fair game. Russellville's feasting tonight, said someone else with a laugh. Still like to get my hands on them fellows, feast or not, concluded another hidden body. After those final comments, I herded my troops along the main and only street with considerable more energy. Granted, these folks had been pressed some, but it didn't strike me that the good people of Russellville were entirely ethical. Not by a long shot. I was sincerely happy to see the end of that village and its 2 churches. I was still fuming over those lost 6 birds when we'd bedded the others and set off for Paul and Cleaver. After all, we'd gone through this far to have my stock disappear that's a way? Why, 6 turkeys was worth... I figured on exactly what they were worth for near a mile. It just come to me when Emmett let out a growl. Mr. Peace clamped a hand on the dog's muzzle fast. Shh! They must be dead ahead. There was a hill in front of us with a line of trees skirting the road. Beyond was nothing but tall grass. I bolted into the grass fast. J-Beth and Mr. Peace followed. We snuck up the hill on our bellies, then spied down on a campsite. The last of the day's hazy sun floated over the other 900 or so of my turkeys that was scratching out sleeping nests amid the tall grass surrounding the supply wagon. And there was Sparky and Snowball and my other mules grazing peacefully alongside them, prize Arabians. But it was a solace to set eyes on them all again. It was a perfect scene, aside from the fact that none of it belonged to me at the moment, the way it should have. I cast my eyes back to the western sky. Now the sun was disappearing into a bank of dark clouds. There'd be light for another hour, maybe. No thanks to the pitiful attempts at a fire Pa and Cleaver was busy concocting in the center of the camp down below. They went at it like they'd never had need to start one before. And they was arguing up a storm the entire time. They sure was a blight on the beauties of beasts and nature in general. You're so ready to use that revolver of yours, Cleaver. How is it that you didn't wing one of them villagers when they went after our birds? Pa was griping. Shut your mouth, Samson. I was doing the best I could. It ain't easy being cowherd to a bunch of stupid turkeys. I should say not. You've been letting them slip through your fingers the livelong day. All the while you were driving the wagon. The easy job. We flipped on that up front, Cleaver. Is it my fault I got heads this morning? And yesterday afternoon, too. It's against the law of averages. I'd like to see that dollar you flipped with Samson. Both sides. If it ain't two-headed, I'll eat the thigh-thick, sopping branch. What Pa was balancing on his shoulder swung dangerously close to Cleaver's head. You accusing me of cheating, Cleaver? Thought you was the expert in that department. Cleaver ducked and backed off. He must have set his gun down somewheres, otherwise I knew it would be pointed at my paw this very instant. Gotta cool that temple of yours, Samson Green. Pa shifted his load again threateningly. Look who's talking, mister. Cleaver backed some more and tried on a little weasel smile. Why don't I just fetch that side of bacon I found in the wagon, Samson? It's been a long day. Good hot supper and everything will look better. Won't look no better till we hit Denver, Pa concluded. How that simple-minded boy of mine got as far as Jefferson City with this freakish animal show is beyond me. Skittering turkeys, mules that hates my guts. Pa finally set down the 5-foot branch and finished out a matchbox. Next to me, J-Beth was convulsing himself with laughter. He was trying to swallow. He thinks he's going to set that Yule log afire with a match, he whispered. I cracked a grin, too. Don't know where exactly my pa's been all the rest of his life, I said, but I guess the circus don't teach you no useful skills. Pa and Cleaver finally gave up on the fire and attacked my side of bacon raw. Next, they both smoked a cigar, glaring at each other across the unlit fire the entire time. By then, it had gone full dark, and it was hard to see aught but the glowing tips of those cheroots. But a body could feel those glares passing between the two, even way up here on the hill. At last, without another word, they both wrapped up in blankets for the night. Sleep well, Pa, I murmured, because this is going to be a short rest for you and Cleaver. By the time the snores from the camp below started drifting up our hill, Mr. Peace was already adding to them. I let him nap a good hour since I knew he could use it. Then I nudged J-Beth. You ready? Raring to go, J-Beth grinned. He was already flashing my Bowie knife. If there was a moon, that blade'd be blazing up a storm. Mr. Peace, I turned to the drover. Oomph! His eyes shot open. We're heading down to camp now. Can you keep Emmett quiet? He shifted up on his elbows from the damp grass. I'll carry him. Should do the trick. Fine. You three stand watch over Cleaver whilst I attend to my paw. I was already unwinding the length of Pa's raw hide that I had wrapped around my waist since being rescued yesterday. Sure you can handle him yourself, son? The man got prodigious on strength. I got me some of that strength too, Mr. Peace, plus some righteous anger. I figure I owe it to Pa to even accounts between us. You got a point, Simon. Good luck to us all. It turned out way easier than I expected. Pa's rifle was lying by his head, and first thing I did was quietly move it out of range. As he was sleeping on his belly, all I did next was set a knee into his back and add a little weight and grab for his flapping arms. His roar of outrage like to wake the dead, and the livestock too. Damn, what devilish fiend is climbing my back? Rest easy, Pa. It's only Simon, your simple-minded son. My fingers were already making quick work with the rawhide knots I was constructing around his wrist. I hate to do this, Pa. It hurts me real bad, but you didn't leave me no choice. In a moment, I was throwing off the blankets and hog-tying Pa's wrists to his ankles. Had to turn around and sit on him to accomplish that, though. All the time, Pa was writhing and spouting a lot of words that would have turned Miss Rogers gray premature. Aunt Mabel, too. I fished in my pocket and pulled out the huge handkerchief. Got something here that belongs to you, Pa. Thought you might like it back. I turned Pa over and began stuffing the gag down his throat. Maybe not quite as tender as he'd done the job on me a day earlier. It ain't necessarily a sign of manliness to talk such talk, Pa. Brave actions and a gentle heart. Pa started in a thump in his entire body with violence. I had to stomp on him a little more. Miss Rogers always said as how those was the things that truly made a man. My eyes caught Pa's through the darkness. They was glaring like that there tiger's back at the circus, with sheer anger and frustration. I guess mine glared a little right back before I raised my head from my efforts at last. How you people doing over there? Mr. Peace had finally released Emmett, and the dog had Cleaver's pistol hand firmly between his teeth. But he had spunk for such a little critter. J-Beth was starting with the other rawhide rope from the feet up, and my drover was happily gagging the coconut man. This'll fix you for holding a gun to me, he was saying. I've been scorned and spat upon, but in my day, no man held a gun to Bidwell peace. I let the boys finish up with their fun, then checked the bonds. They was good and strong. Finally, Mr. Peace seemed to notice me. What next, Simon? How do we dispose of them so they won't get back into our hair right quick? Got some ideas about that, Mr. Peace. I truly do, but first things first. I bent over Cleaver and felt for his pockets. Nothing there. Then I thought to try his belt. What you doing, Simon? Jabeth asked. We ain't no thieves. Not by a long shot. A grin spread over my face as I felt the thickness of the belt. I split it open and spilled out coins. But Pa and Cleaver owe me for 6 turkeys. Denver price. Also for a few more that probably strayed past us during the day. And I already turned out Pa's pockets. They was sheer empty aside from that double-headed silver dollar of his. I let him keep that as he might be needing it down the road the way his luck's been turning. I began counting the $5 gold pieces. 6 of these would make $30. That's for Russellville's turkey feast. I looked up. I want to be fair, Mr. Peace, and you ain't got as much invested as me. What you figure I should have beyond? Mr. Peace bent to finger the pile. I was counting them nesting birds in the sunset, Simon. Seems like another 15 gold pieces ought to cover the damage. I completed the transaction and got to my feet. All right, then, Mr. Peace, you and Emmett stay on here at the main camp for the night. Jabeth and me are going to load up the mules with these gentlemen and give them a ride back to Russellville. Folks there expressed some interest in meeting up with them again. While Jabeth grinned in anticipation, I glanced around the campsite, sorting out the last arrangements in my mind. The only other thing to decide about is those prize horses. Should I be leaving them in Russellville with Pa and Cleaver, Mr. Peace? He rubbed at his cheek. I don't know, Simon. On the one hand, it'd just be like putting temptation back smack into your Pa's hands again. On the other hand, those Russellville folks are just as likely to latch onto the horses themselves, considering their record for high principles. I'd sure hate to have the circus people accuse us of rustling, Mr. Peace, in case they ever came looking for that horse flesh. We didn't open any barn doors, Simon, no matter how you look at it, and it's a fine breeding pair. I'm thinking they'll go for a decent price in Denver if we was to treat 'em right along the way. Then again, they make a good start to somebody's establishment, if he was considering starting a ranching-type establishment out of the ways. Mr. Peace stopped, then started in again. Mules is fine creatures in and of themselves, but you gotta admit, Simon, they ain't got no breeding future whatsoever. That being possibly the longest speech I ever heard from Mr. Peace, it took a moment to work around its ramifications. Aside from the obvious fact any fool knew, which was that mules couldn't make youngins. The bottom line was that Mr. Peace was already in love with those prize Arabians. I could see his feelings clear through the night's darkness. I nodded and spun away. Fine, we'll take a chance with the horses. Meanwhile, Jabeth and me will stop the night with the other birds and see you here in the morning. Then, I finished, then we can move on to Denver. Mr. Peace smiled with evident relief. Couldn't have planned it better myself, son. Chapter 9. It was joyous meeting of the flocks the next morning. My birds acted like they was genuinely delighted to see each other again, especially the lost toms, the way they was strutting and fanning their fine tails to catch the attentions of the admiring hens. Mr. Peace had done up glorious breakfast, too. While the birds socialized and we gorged, more plans were worked out. I figure we can make it to Versailles sometime tomorrow, Simon, Mr. Peace said. That there's the biggest town we're likely to come across before Denver, outside of Independence. Might be wise to top up our supplies with a little of Cleaver's money. Those coins were clanking around in my pockets. Had been all morning in the short haul to main camp. Work up a list, Mr. Peace. I might have a few things to add to it. I knew right off what was chief among that list, too. Watching Jabeth do his scarecrow imitation to one side of the small flock this morning had settled his main problem in my mind. It had to do with his feet. There he was, kind of mincing hither and yon, flapping like usual. Jabeth, I said. Yes, Simon? How's it you don't walk funny like that except when you're working the birds? He stopped cold in his tracks. A hangdog expression spread over his face. Don't like to mention something so silly, Simon. Spit it out, Jabeth. You're among friends. Well, his head was still drooping, nearly down to his splayed bare toes. I'm learning to love your turkeys better every day, Simon. Truly I am. But, I pushed him along. But, then he finally spit it out, fast. But I hate like blazes to have to squish through the fresh turkey droppings, Simon. So that was it. It didn't take me no time at all to grasp the situation. Before you know it, I'm slapping my knees roaring, near to rolling in them identical droppings. Jabeth, he didn't see the humor of it the way I did. You got boots, Simon. I caught myself long enough to stare down my body. So I did. Yet I chuckled on and off the last half mile to Mr. Peace's breakfast anyhow, and kept on chuckling through the meal. The next day, we left a flock just outside Versailles with Mr. Peace and Emmett. J-Beth and I headed past the outlying wheat fields into town. Still being in slave territory, though not north of the Missouri River in Little Dixie, where most of the owners lived, J-Beth hunched into his toe-editing act and started treating me to his master nonsense again. He shuffled a few steps behind me, he bowed and scraped. It grated. But as it was for his own long-term good, I put up with it. After perambulating the town, we settled on the biggest general store where J-Beth trailed me inside. I guess we didn't look that flush because nobody paid us any mind. Cleared my throat a few times to no effect. Then I started in losing patience. I raised my voice a little. Need to look at some boots? Last, the storekeeper glanced up from his ledger books and down to my feet. For you? Don't know as we stock 'em that big. Nope, for my boy here. A look of scorn passed across the man's face. Ain't got slave grade here. Don't want slave grade. Want a good solid pair of boots so's I don't have to be reshodding them for a long while. He perked up. If that's the case. Poor J-Beth had some time getting fitted. First off, I had to buy him socks so his black feet wouldn't contaminate the stock. Then he hobbled around in half a dozen pair, looking like maybe the boot idea was a poor one to begin with. I finally bent over to where he was prodding at a toe cap. Ain't you ever had boots before, J-Beth? I whispered. Never, he tossed back, and I'm beginning to wonder if they's worth all the fuss, master. Watch your tongue, boy, I said in a louder tone, else you won't get that new shirt I promised. New shirt? That sparked up J-Beth considerable. He hobbled around a little more. Think these'll do fine, master sir. Just need to break 'em in. We left our grocery order piled on the floor, ready to fetch when we walked the flock through town the next morning. What we carried out was J-Beth's old rags, done up in a parcel as if they were the finest silk cloth. That shopkeeper had finally stood up and saluted to the color of money. As for J-Beth, he was sporting new togs from top to bottom and inside out, with extra drawers and even an extra shirt for when the first batch got too stiff with dirt to wear. I bought me a few extras on that account, too. Uncle Lucas hadn't exactly set me loose from the farm in style. I'd also invested in a new Bowie knife to replace the one on permanent loan to J-Beth. Besides a tin plate and cup and blanket to complete J-Beth's kit, the final purchase pleased me mightily. It was a spanking new slouch hat for Mr. Peace. We started to walk back to the turkeys in high spirits. The barbershop stopped me in my tracks. I took a look at J-Beth's halo of tight curls, then felt the length of my own thatch. One more stop, J-Beth. I sank into the barber's chair first. I had never been in one before, Aunt Mabel always having done the honors with her mixing bowl and sewing scissors. It was a novelty having a towel slung across my shoulders and the barber standing there stropping his razors. What'll it be, he asked. Wash, cut, and shave? I felt my roughened cheeks and grinned. Why not? Mr. Peace liked to faint when he saw the two of us strutting back into camp. What in tarnation? What you fellas gone and done to yourselves? I turned full before him. Hadn't recognized myself either when that Versailles barber dusted me all down with the sweet-smelling talc and had a little mirror to my face. A new and different Simon Green had stared back at me. I swore off mixing bowl haircuts then and there for the rest of my natural life. Still, it was nice to know that old Simon was underneath it all. How about J-Beth here, Mr. Peace? I trolled my friend for good measure. J-Beth, he hadn't needed the shave, and the cut took about 3 inches off his height. But I thought he ended up right handsome in the process. Between that and the new duds, it didn't flap, of course. Approve of the effect, Mr. Peace? Think I'll just go hide out with the mules, the Skinner answered. Ain't nobody gonna give me a second look next to you two blades. I think they might at that, I said, and I pulled out his new hat from behind my back. What's this? Mr. Peace reached for the present, then dropped his fingers. Ain't it time, Mr. Peace? You've been looking for a new life, haven't you? Seems to me as if a new hat fits right in with a new life. He finally accepted my present. He fingered the clean black felt for a long time. At last, he swung off the old article and clapped on the new. Man don't need a drink any more when he's got friends as good as you, Simon, was all he said. Then he stomped off to the mules. The next few days, we made good time through more wheat country to the village of Coal Camp, where we swung north along what Mr. Peace said was the last section of dirt road for a ways. Mr. Peace knew his roads from his droving days along the Santa Fe Trail, and afterward taken wagons on shorter hauls around Missouri. That 20-mile stretch due north was a nice piece to travel on account of it following the spring fork, which gave the birds all the water they wanted. It was truly amazing how much a turkey could drink. They was pretty good about trotting along most of the day, but when they decided it was time to stop, they wanted plenty to drink, then plenty to eat before settling for the night. We got to talking about exactly how much they could drink one evening around the campfire. Well, Mr. Peace considered, strikes me that a medium bird could down a couple quarts of water a day. More, Jabeth threw in 3 quarts. End of the day, you're always tending to the 4-legged animals, Mr. Peace, sir. I don't think you pay that much mind to the turkeys. Do too, Mr. Peace said, that like he'd been insulted. I'd have to go along with Jabeth on this one, Mr. Peace. I tossed the skeleton of a trout from my plate and reached into the fry pan for another helping of Jabeth's catch. I'd go as high as a gallon myself. That got Mr. Peace's ire up. A gallon? We hit Sedalia tomorrow where the road ends and we head due west again? Yes? You be willing to put out a few coins for a little testing device? What sort of testing device? Jabeth interrupted. I don't see how a person can measure what a turkey drinks, nohow. A very simple device, Mr. Peace grinned, and not a total waste of funds either, as it'll have long-term uses for all of us, man and beast alike. Come on, Mr. Peace. He got me wondering now. What exactly is it you have in mind? But Mr. Peace only grinned some more and turned in for the night. So the next morning we set off with a little more vigor and anticipation in our steps than usual. Jabeth and I, he was mighty curious about what Mr. Bidwell Peace was holding up his sleeves. But when we finally got to Sedalia, Mr. Peace just stretched out his hand, palm up. I crossed it with a coin, and he disappeared into the one and only store. Meanwhile, there was Jabeth and Emmett and me and the birds clogging the dusty little road through town. Naturally, we roused some interest from the local folks. All of them, seems like. They stood around gaping, but saying nothing until my drover emerged again, his hands full. Why, there's nothing but a 10-gallon copper wash tub, Mr. Peace. Correct, Simon. Like my mama did all the laundry in, Jabeth added. Yep, Mr. Peace verified. When you boys figure is the key part of that description you give me? What you boys figure is the key part of that description you just give me? Well, Jabeth and I both scratched our heads over that one. Jabeth spoke up first. The 10-gallon part. Give that boy a cigar. Mr. Peace cackled like a madman all the way to the town pump. There he commenced to fill the tub with water, right up to the very brim. Then he waved us over. Clear a little space between the birds, Jabeth. You haul this to the space, Simon. Mind you don't spill a drop? I followed his direction, shaking my head the entire time. Had that spanking new hat done something to Mr. Peace's brain power? The villagers came closer, surrounding us. One of the men finally spoke. You fellas got a little bet going on here? Looks like a bet to me. Another man shot out a spurt of tobacco juice. If it be a proper bet, like to go in on it. Ain't been no action around here in a coon's age. Mr. Peace trotted front and center, eyes twinkling. Certainly, gentlemen, you're all welcome to partake of our little wager. A nickel will get you in, but let me explain this. First, this, he waved at the tub, this is a 10-gallon copper wash tub. You all agree on that? Solomon Head, nodding, began. Right, and it's filled to the very brim with water, fresh, pure spring water from your very own fine village well. 10 gallons of it. More nods. Next, Mr. Peace pointed toward my flock. Those are turkeys, nearly 1,000 of the finest top-notch bronze turkeys. Our wager is simple. We're just trying to figure out how much a hale and hearty turkey can drink in a sitting. My estimate is 2 quarts each. My associates, he pointed at Jabeth and me, they figure 3 quarts and 1 gallon, respectively. Got all that? More nodding and a little head scratching from the crowd, which had expanded even more by this time. The bartender from the saloon on the far side of the street must have lost his customers, because he dragged out a table and set a few bottles and glasses onto it. Then he went back to haul out a couple of chairs. How you going to prove it? A broad-bearded gent finally asked. Mr. P smiled. Simple, my good sir. We set 10 turkeys to the tub. We let them drink their fill. Then we see what's left. Closest bets to the 3 estimates share the pot. I'm in. The first nickel got tossed into the ground. For 2 quarts. Me too. Another nickel followed, starting a second pile. For 3 quarts. I'm betting with that big fella. My head jerked up at the new voice. It was a lady placing the bet. She was leaning out the open window over the saloon, sort of dressed like Miss Lila back at the circus. At least the part of her I could see. She tossed the coin down to me. Here you go, big boy. I caught it. A whole quarter, ma'am? I put my money on winners. She laughed, and so did the bartender and other gentlemen, who were now heading for the bottles. I carefully started a 3rd pile, then stared at Mr. Peace. Who'd have thought he had this whole project in him? Why, he could teach a few things to Cleaver the Coconut Man. I stepped over to Jabeth. Guess we better catch 10 birds. I leaned a little closer and make 'em big ones, Jabeth. Turned out J-Beth and I didn't have to do all the work. Those locals, they joined in on the game with glee. Pretty soon, there was J-Beth and me kneeling in the dirt just outside the brim of the full tub, holding a fat tom each. 8 of the men was each hanging on to a bird too. The turkeys already smelled the water and had their necks stretched, bright red wattles convulsing in anticipation. Above us, Mr. Peace was grinning to beat the band. Now, I'm about to count to 3, he said. On the count of 3, I swoops off my hat. That's when you all set loose the birds. We waited. The crowd edged around us. The crowd edging around us did too. 1, Mr. Peace was having the time of his life. 2, he was stretching out for all it was worth. 3, off swooped the new hat with a flourish. Down plopped the birds, panting for water. I got to my feet and backed off a ways, but not too far. So did everyone else. But we're standing there in silence under the hot sun, nobody saying anything for fear of putting the turkeys off their drinks. After a while, you could see the difference in the tub's water level. That water was noticeably disappearing by the inch. My birds didn't stop. They leaned over the rim, brown legs and claws stretched tense behind them. They just kept on dipping their beaks into the coolness and guzzling the liquid down their long throats. When the water got below the halfway mark, J-Beth poked me. I never knowed watching turkeys could be so interesting. I glanced around at the men, the lady above the saloon, the rest of the village. It was as if the whole place was under some kind of spell. The remainder of my flock, too. They were straining their necks, wattles and snoods throbbing, eyes cocked toward the tub, trying to figure out what was happening. I smiled. I knew birds was interesting all along, J-Beth. Finally, there came a long sigh from everyone when a great cheer. Those 10 turkeys was waddling away from the tub, bloated. They just up and left. I walked closer and peeked in. Wasn't hardly a drop of water left. They'd drunk it all. Whee! I yelled. I was right. That makes a good gallon each. There was some backslapping followed by the division of the pot. That lady over the saloon had done all right after all. I did too. I made enough in the wager to pay for the original tub. It hadn't been a bad investment after all. Way better than playing around with coconut shells. I turned to Mr. Peace. He was standing there rubbing his chin. Well, Mr. Peace? Well, son, he answered, I was just figuring on whether the turkeys could go for more water after all. If we was to set 5 birds to the 10 gallons. I gave my drover a friendly shove. One time is fun, Mr. Peace. I'm not after pressing our luck or our birds. Then I grinned. So as he'd know, I was overall pleased with him. And I'm not sure exactly how I feel about traveling with a gambling man. Mr. Peace, he only cackled a final time. Then he clapped his new hat atop his head. Let's move out with the turkeys, boys, before they roost in the middle of the Sedalia's Main Street.